In this unit, we're going to take a closer look at controls, and in particular web controls, ASPX controls. So I've opened up this example from chapter 6 of our text, and I'm looking at the the checklist test ASPX file. So I've opened that up. It's in design mode here, and I can see I've got a form here, I've got a checkbox list, and a button and a label. So I've gotten those all over here from the toolbars. One thing we'll note is that there are both checkboxes and checkbox lists, and radio buttons and radio button lists. We'll tend to use the list ones for these. You can put individual checkbox, but if you have a sequence of them, it's better to put them in a list, and we'll see some code benefits in just a sec. It's very similar to the Windows area where we put a radio button on the set a radio button inside a group. And I've named these various things, so checklist and the buttons command OK, things like that. Now what we haven't looked at much is the HTML source for these. So besides working in design mode, you can also work in source mode. And this is the HTML source for this ASPX form. So again, because this was a ASPX form, there's a form tag inside my HTML body tag. So this is all standard HTML above this, and so is the form, this sort of stuff. So I have a form and a div, and I've got some text with a break. That's a line feed basically. Now this is non-standard HTML here. I have some ASP controls here, checkbox list, buttons, and labels, and some of the parameters are set here. And I notice, like, if I add another button to my field here, that button shows up in my source field here. And again, if I change it in source here, my new button, it will change it in design mode. So I can work in design mode or in, I'm going to delete this now, in source mode. I can jump back and forth between these two. So sometimes we'll work here and work at properties, and sometimes we'll work here in the HTML form. Okay, now over here I also see, and we've seen this before, I've got my ASPX page, and underneath that I have a C# page, the same name with a .cs added to it. And if I'm in the designer and I double click on like the OK button, I know there's an event set up there. It'll automatically jump me into this C# version. And now there are two events coded in here. So here's my project, my class, and here's my page load event, and here's my command OK click button event. Now one thing we will notice that's somewhat new here is that we are adding items to our checkbox list in code. For now, for just a sec, we're going to ignore this is postback, and it'll be important just next video. So I'm going to look at the checklist items. So rather than going in here and adding them to the items collection here, I can do that in code. So I'm doing checklist, the name of my checklist, .items.add, and adding them. We will do more of these things in code now, and also be tying them to a database and things like that. So we'll see this more often. When I click the OK button, I can see one of the benefits of using the checkbox list. So I've got my label results. So that's my label here that I'm going to put some words into. I'm doing you choose, and then the B is like a break in HTML. And then I'm going to use this for each loop for each items. Here's my checkbox list, and then if I grab my items, so that'll return to me an array list of all the items in my checkbox list, so these items that I've added up here. And so this loop will go through, and list item will be set to each item in my checkbox list. I'm just going to check if that item is selected, and if so, I'm going to add some text to my results. And so I'm just going to add the text that's in here, so with the text I added to the list items. I'm just going to build that out. Okay, so this is my code. Let's just run this real quick and see what we've got. When I run this, it runs in a web page that I can see. Now, one thing I'll note right away is that let me pull up the page source here. The source is different than my source. I can see some similarities. The top is very much the same. HTML, header, body, a form tag here. Then there's a bunch of gobbledygook here that we'll talk about in just a sec. And this stuff even looks a little different here. I do see like a submit button and a span for my label here. So let's just compare that to my source code. So this source code is translated. Let me just jump and bring up the text real quick. So this is, the left side here is our web browser, our client, and the right side is the server. So when we open up that page, a page request was sent to our server. And again, when you just test these out, it runs a simple server on the same machine as you're working. But in the real world, your client, your browser would be probably on one machine and your server will be on a different machine, often over the internet. So here's the ASPX. So the first thing is done is that we create the code, the objects needed from the ASPX C# code, and then we run the page load event handler, and then the page is rendered in HTML, and HTML is sent back to the browser. So if I go to the browser, that's what I see. I see the actual results of the rendering. It translates, the server translates my ASPX page into here. So for example, my label here is actually translated into a span, and my button here is translated into a traditional HTML input button. So here's my input button, here's the span that is my label. And my checkbox list is actually translated into a table with a bunch of checkboxes in them for this. So that's all set up here for me, and they're all tied together. And again, this code is run, this code is generated through the page load event. So if I look at my page load event is run, and all this code is generated. So again, I requested a new page, we create the objects, and then we run the page load event, and we return the rendered HTML file back to the client. Now we're going to do this. We're going to do something on my client and hit a button, and it's going to do this next step here. So let me click on a couple options here and hit OK, and we'll see a slight delay here while it sends a request back to the server and comes back. Not much of a delay since we're right here. Both the browser, the client and the server on the same machine when we're testing out. But now I'll notice that my source code is going to be different here. I still have the traditional stuff, and I still have these strange things we don't know. This big view state data and my event validation fields, these hidden fields that we'll talk about later on. But I'll notice, like here, my results have been added to this span. So some of this stuff has been changed, and whether or not these are checked or not has been changed. So some of these values have been marked as checked. So what that does is, let me bring up when we hit a button and certain other events, we recreate the objects in the ASPX C# code. We run the page load event again, and that's why we have to be careful, because every time we click a button, we rerun the page load event. So this is called a postback when we do that. And then we run any other triggered event handlers, and so at this point we will be running our command click event handler. And then finally the page is re-rendered in new HTML and sent back to the server. So that's the basic format. So we'll look at next video at more detail at this postback and what kind of events are happening here.